The sheriff's truck is parked at the gate, and the sheriff is reading from a paper, and the man who owns the land is listening. It is September of 1958, and the county road that runs along the eastern fence line of the Broward property smells of caliche dust and cedar, and the flat heat that sits on the Texas Hill country like a lid in late summer. The kind of road where trucks slow down because they know the ruts, and the neighbors know the trucks. The kind of place where a man's land is the plainest fact about him, the thing he points to when he needs to explain who he is. The sheriff's name was Calhoun. He was not a cruel man. He had a document, and he had a duty, and he had done. He held the paper in a way that made clear he had read it enough times to know what it said. He told Earl Broward that the tax lien on the northeast parcel had been purchased by a land company out of San Antonio, and that the redemption period had expired on the 1st of the month, and that he was there in an official capacity to inform Earl of his obligation to vacate the parcel within 72 hours or be removed. Earl Broward had farmed that ground for 14 years. He had cleared the cedar off the northeast parcel himself, with a chainsaw and a come-along, and 14-hour days in the summer of 1946, the year he came home. He stood at his own gate and listened to the sheriff read. A man in a canvas jacket and a battered tan Stetson was leaning against a truck on the opposite side of the county road, looking at the terrain the way a man looks at terrain when he is thinking about how a camera would see it. He had been up and down this road twice that week. He was not supposed to be working. He had stopped because of the two trucks and the stillness. He had not moved since the sheriff started reading. Here is the story. Earl Broward had grown up 40 miles south of where he now stood, in a limestone country outside Kerrville, where the soil is thin and the ranchers raise goats on the rock and call it a living. His father had leased that ground, never owned it. Earl had understood from early on the difference between a man who leases and a man who owns, not as a matter of pride, but as a matter of permanence. A leased life can be ended by someone else. An owned life cannot. He enlisted in the Army in December of 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor. He was 23 years old. He served with the 2nd Infantry Division through the Normandy campaign and then into Belgium. And he came home in the summer of 1945 with a Purple Heart from the Hurtgen Forest, November 1944, where a piece of German artillery had taken a chip out of his left shoulder blade that he carried for the rest of his life as a stiffness. And he came home to Texas, and he worked 2 years at a lumber yard in San Antonio and saved every dollar he did not spend on rent. In 1947, he bought 63 acres in Gillespie County, the northeast parcel and the southwest parcel together, split by a dry creek that ran in February and March and sat quiet the rest of the year. The previous owner had grown peaches on the southwest side and left the northeast to cedar. Earl cleared the cedar in 1946. He had started before the deed was even signed, working weekends from a borrowed truck, and by 1948, he had 12 acres of that parcel under cultivation. Corn and sorghum, some oats. Not a rich man's operation. The operation of a man who had decided what he was going to do with the rest of his life. He had a wife who had waited 4 years and married him 3 weeks after he came home. They had a son, Thomas, who was 7 years old in 1958 and who rode with Earl on the tractor when the field allowed it and was already learning the names of the tools. The tax lien had started in 1955. A clerical dispute. Earl's payment on the northeast parcel had been applied by the county to the wrong account, and by the time the error surfaced, a penalty had accrued, and the penalty had grown the way penalties grow when a man is working the land and not watching the paperwork. Earl had gone to the county office twice. He had brought his receipts. The first clerk had told him it was being looked into. The second had told him the lien had already been sold, The land company in San Antonio had paid $340 for the lien. The redemption figure, with penalties and fees, was $980 by the time the period closed on September 4th. Earl had $910 in the bank. He had been $70 short. The sheriff came on a Tuesday morning. Thomas was at school. Nadine was in the kitchen. Earl had been moving irrigation pipe in the southwest parcel when he heard the truck on the county road and came around to the gate. He stood at his own gate with his hat in his hand. He had taken it off without thinking about it, the way a man takes off his hat when he is receiving something he does not want, and he listened to Calhoun read the document. Calhoun finished and folded the paper and held it out. Earl took it. He looked at it. The truck on the other side of the road had not moved. The man leaning against it had not moved. 72 hours. 3 days. He looked out at the northeast parcel the way a man looks at the ground he has been working for 11 years. The hill country light came down flat and clean on the corn rows he had planted in April. 12 acres. He had cleared every cedar off those 12 acres himself, the summer before his deed was signed, because he had known it was going to be his, and had not seen a reason. The driver of the other truck had straightened up from the fender. He crossed the county road. If you have ever watched a man who gave something to this country stand at the edge of what he built and have to listen to a bureaucrat tell him it was over, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. He walked to the gate the way he walked across every set he had ever worked on, no hurry in it, no announcement. Just a large man moving with a particular kind of deliberateness that had nothing impatient in it. He stepped off the gravel and stopped at the gate beside Earl and looked at Calhoun. He said, "What's the redemption figure?" Calhoun looked at him. He took a moment to understand who he was looking at. Then he said, $980, including fees. The man in the canvas jacket reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded envelope. He counted the bills on the top rail of the gate, 10s and 20s, the way a man counts money when he is not trying to impress anyone, just trying to get to a number, and he stacked them in a flat pile and set them on the rail and said, "That's 1,000. I'll want a receipt from the county for the 980, and you can keep the rest for your trouble." Calhoun looked at the money. He looked at the man. He said, "I'm not authorized to. You're authorized to take a payment to the county on a tax lien. That's what this is." Calhoun was quiet for a moment. He folded the document. He put it back in his shirt pocket. He picked up the money from the fence rail and counted it the way a careful man counts money that isn't his twice. He wrote the receipt on the back of a county form he had in his truck and signed it. He handed it across the gate to Earl Broward. Then he got in his truck and drove south without looking back. Earl held the receipt. He stood at the gate with it and looked at the northeast parcel for a while. Then he looked at the man beside him. He started to speak. The man said, "2nd Infantry, Hurchin Forest, November 44. A pause. "I know what that forest cost. That parcel doesn't come close to square." Earl Broward does not say anything. His jaw moves once, his hand tightens around the receipt, and then he makes himself loosen it because he does not want to damage the paper. The man put his hat back on. He said, "You've got 12 acres of corn out there, and it looks straight." Then he walked back to his truck and drove north on the county road and did not stop again. Nadine came out of the house when she heard the truck on the road. Earl was standing at the gate with the receipt in his hand. She asked what had happened. He told her it was handled. That was all he said. And that was all he would say. For the rest, Earl Broward farmed that northeast parcel for 27 more years. He never had another lien. He kept a second ledger after 1958, a separate book, just for the tax accounts, and he checked it the first week of every January for the rest of his life. The book was meticulous. It had a column for payment dates, a column for confirmation numbers, a column for the name of the clerk. There was never another discrepancy. The corn and sorghum rotated with oats, and, starting in 1963, a section of the northeast parcel that Earl converted to peaches, the same variety the original owner had grown on the southwest side, Alberta peaches, which did well in the Gillespie County soil and sold at the Fredericksburg market every August. By 1970, Earl had 20 acres under cultivation across both parcels. He employed 2 hands in the harvest season and 1 year-round. He paid them what the work was worth and did not ask for gratitude. Thomas Broward graduated from Southwest Texas State in 1973 with a degree in agriculture. He came back to Gillespie County and worked his father's ground, and learned it the way his father had learned it, from the soil up, from the first frost forward, from the equipment that broke and the years that didn't rain enough, and the seasons that came right and the ones that didn't. He bought the adjacent 22 acres in 1979 when the neighbor retired, and the Broward operation became 85 acres, which is what it still is. Earl died in 1991. He had never sold an acre. At the funeral, Thomas stood up and said one thing about his father that he had been carrying for a long time. He said his father had told him once that the northeast parcel had nearly been lost and that a stranger had stepped up to the gate and settled the figure before Earl could say a word, and that his father had never found out why, except that the man had named the Hurtgen Forest and said the parcel didn't come close to square. Thomas said he had been 7 years old in 1958, and he had come home from school that afternoon, and his mother had made supper, and his father had eaten and gone to bed early without explaining anything, and Thomas had known, from the way the house was quiet, that something had shifted. He had not known what until his father told him, years later. He said his father had kept the receipt a county tax form, signed by Sheriff Calhoun, dated September 9, 1958, for $980, is in a frame on the wall of the kitchen in the farmhouse in Gillespie County. Thomas hung it there the year his father died, in the room where Earl had kept his ledgers, in the room where Nadine had been standing when she heard the truck on the county road that Tuesday morning. The window in that kitchen faces northeast, out across the parcel that was almost lost and wasn't, and in the morning the light comes through it and crosses the frame on the wall and the receipt inside it, and then it moves on, and the receipt stays. John Wayne never spoke of it. Not to the location scouts he was working with that week in the Hill Country, not to the director or the producer of the film he was preparing, not to a reporter, not in any interview, not in any letter that has ever been found. Whatever he told his people about where he had been that Tuesday morning and why he was late coming back, he told it simply, and they asked no more about it. $1,000 left on a fence rail he set it down the way a man sets down something that was already owed, not something freely given. He had named the Hurtgen Forest. He had said the parcel didn't come close to square. That was the accounting he was working from, his own. Private, not subject. A man who had spent 4 years in German mud and artillery and come home to 63 acres in the Texas Hill Country had earned something the land company in San Antonio had no business collecting. Wayne understood the difference between a man who owes and a man who gives. He was not there to give anything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.